Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of Chilling with the Villain. Can you believe that it's been 20 episodes already? Feels like we just started the other day. But if this is the first time that you're listening to the podcast, this is the Classic Wrestling Review podcast where we sit down, chill out, and watch some classic wrestling, then review it for you, the I used to watch wrestling types. I am, of course, the villain, Marty Skell. And joining me today, as always, is the producer of the show, the king of the tables, Samuel Scott. And you know what? I have news for everyone. Today, I'm handing the keys of the show to my producer, Sam. Sam, they're all yours.
Thank you very much for this. I won't abuse it. Okay, I'm abusing it a little bit, but we'll cut to that later. Oh man, how have you been?
Well, I'm doing very well, thank you. And I think it is worth noting that today we are reviewing Judgment Day 2004. For more newer fans of wrestling, no, we're not talking about the stable. We're not talking about Dominic Mysterio and Mami, but we will be talking about Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero on this Judgment Day 2004 review. And I think it's going to be a real fun one to go back and watch and review for all you fans. It was, well, I won't get into it now because we're going to review the whole thing. But Sam, you chose this show. Why?
Yes, I did. You know how Heatwave, everyone said, hey, this is an old one, but it was a good one. And we went back and we watched it and we felt like actually it wasn't that good. Think of the opposite of that. I have in my head Judgment Day 2004 as being a really good pay-per-view, bearing in mind that I last watched it when it came out. Well, in 2005, I got the DVD. And I was just talking about it with some friends recently, and they were all like, and everybody seems to remember this as a bit of a dud. So I thought, isn't this the point of the podcast?
It is.
You know, let's go back and revisit this and see if it holds up or if we were incorrect, or maybe if we can see things that we appreciate now that we didn't back then, vice versa. I just thought that's a very interesting, very polarizing pay-per-view then, obviously. Let's give it a go.
Yeah, and you know, this is nearly 20 years ago now. So
right.
you do see things differently after that amount of time and as you grow older and as you gain new knowledge and everything else. So it is really fun to go back and watch these shows. And obviously the way I watched wrestling as a kid and growing up, obviously completely different to how I watch wrestling now, having been in the business myself for 20 years and become completely jaded and bitter and everything else. So
I'm actually curious. Do you recall your kind of childhood memories of this pay-per-view?
This one I do actually, yes.
Yeah. Were they fond memories or were you kind of not so sure?
I think I might need to save that for the actual review.
Oh, really?
I don't think I was a happy bunny that Bradshaw was getting a world title match, but we'll get into it.
We'll get to that. The Berg 511 asks, this is a good question. What would you want to see from 80s, 90s wrestling return to today's product?
Where do I start?
How much time do we have?
I mean, for sure the characters and the emphasis more on characters and storytelling and character development, less focus on the in-ring stuff. Like now wrestling in 2023, nearly 2024, which is pretty unbelievable. There's so much emphasis on the in-ring product. And I honestly don't feel like that's the magic part of wrestling. Obviously that's great. And it's really cool to watch a great match. But what got me hooked into wrestling was that 80s and 90s era. And it wasn't when the guys were trying to do every move under the sun that they knew or everything else. It was because of the larger than life characters and the people I could relate to and everything else. And I wanted to know where the story went. So I felt like in the 80s and 90s, they were a lot better at that. And I guess that kind of goes into my next point. The 80s and 90s just seem to have so much more mystique than current wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously a big part of that is just the natural evolution with, you know, even at the first point, it was the biographies came out, and then documentaries came out, and then social media became a thing, and podcasts like this. So maybe I'm being a hypocrite now because, I'm revealing behind scenes stuff of wrestling. But in this day and age, behind scenes is not even behind scenes. It's just scenes. It is seen. Right. Like everyone knows everything, it seems. And like that to me is an actual shame. And I'm obviously the case here is kind of like, if you can't beat them, join them. Like I kind of, that the rabbit's out of the hat now. Do you know what I mean? So that is the case. But I kind of wish it wasn't. I kind of wish it was. I at least wish we had that mystique back. Like I can't imagine being a kid and going on Papa Shango's Twitter and he's talking about his dinner from Chili's. That would completely kill, the mystique. So, but yeah, there's a bunch of stuff I could go from the 80s and 90s, but I'll keep it quick. What about yourself, Sam?
The physiques, I think, have changed. I want to see every 9 out of 10 of people being beefcakes. And this one is kind of similar to yours, but there is a distinction. A greater emphasis on cartoonier gimmicks. I think, like very overt gimmicks, like clown, dumpster guy, this kind of stuff. Like more, I do miss that. I really do.
What about like I don't know if you've seen him, like a Dan Holzen or an Orange Cassidy? Would that count as them or not?
I think so. I'm gonna I think so. He's clearly defined.
I mean, there are obviously, I don't want to seem like I'm just completely crapping on today's wrestling. There are some improvements. And when you said about the physiques, I can kind of see both sides, because I do believe that wrestlers should certainly look impressive and be larger than life. And a big part of that is being big and in shape, of course. And for sure, wrestlers should all be in shape. At the same time, a lot of the wrestlers back in the 80s, especially the 80s, to keep those physiques, they had to do a lot of stuff that was not good for them and their health. And it's a big part of the reason why a lot of my heroes aren't here today, sadly. Right. So that sort of change in wrestling, I like in this day and age, I'm sure there's still plenty of guys, using PEDs like they were back then, but it's not to the extent, at least, as it was back then. I don't think so anyway. We certainly don't have the physiques to suggest that it's like it was in the 80s.
Yeah, I see both sides. For me, though, I feel like wrestling should be not aspirational TV, but it should be something that you put on. And I want to see these larger than life gods among men and women where I can be like, oh, I wish I could reach that. When I turn it on and I look at, and half of the roster I could probably beat up, is not TV that I want to watch. But more than that, that also makes like Spike Dudley types pointless, irrelevant. Right. And I like both archetypes.
Sure.
It needs it to work.
And, I'm a smaller man, certainly in height and everything else, but I definitely like to consider myself in good shape. But at the same time, because I'm smaller, I also would like to consider myself the exception and not the rule. But that's why I try to carry myself in such a way that is larger than life. And I think I do a good job of that because, in day-to-day life, if I'm traveling or anything else, I'll often get people. Sometimes I'll even get like, you're a wrestler, but sometimes I'll get like, what are you? Like, you look like you're in a rock band, or what do you do? So I have some kind of aura about me. And that's obviously why the villain character is so over the top, because, I'm like, I still want to be, I'm not the biggest guy, but let's have the biggest personality. Let's make the presentation larger than life. And sometimes I'll watch wrestling this day and age, not going to name any names, and there'll be guys smaller than me and they're wearing tracksuit bottoms and a hoodie to the ring, and I'm like, what are you, this is like, people are paying to see you. If they see you wearing a hoodie that they can buy from Walmart for $20, like, it makes you so familiar. Do you know what I mean? And I get people will say, well, that could be a gimmick as well. And they'll say, the everyman or I don't know, a lot of times they'll use like Mick Foley as an example, but I think in that case, people forget sort of how big and larger than life Mick Foley is. Like, trust me, I've met him. He towers over me. He's massive, you know? And obviously there's always exceptions to the rule.
Yes.
But yeah. And that, again, that all just comes back to my point, basically, like the mystique. That's what we like in wrestling.
Yeah. And it's not just about height or even like muscles. Like charisma is an attribute. So if you're not tall, like freakishly tall, freakishly muscly, be wildly charismatic or wildly interesting, like something larger than life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Who asked that question?
Cool. That was Berg511.
Well, thank you, Berg511. Berg asked that question on the Instagram. So if you're not following us on Instagram already, please make sure you do, at The Villain Pod. And also, if you enjoy this podcast, then please give us a 5-star review. That would really, really help. And it helps with our algorithm and everything else. And if you do, and we like the review, we'll read it out on the show and you'll get a shout out. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. AJ did that. Just that on Apple Podcasts, 5-star review. Thank you, AJ. Goes on to say, this podcast is so fun. I agree. Whether you're a wrestling fan or a wrestler, it's a fun listen. The viewers should be called Minions because it's a play on villain, and you guys should totally review Ready to Rumble. I would love to review Ready to Rumble. I'm with you on that, AJ. Minions... You know what I think of when I think of Minions? That's think of right? A sassy quote on Facebook, but the quote has a minion from the movie next to it, but the quote isn't from a minion. You must know what I mean. You've seen those?
Yes.
So yes. I don't think we can do it. That'd be too damaging to the brand.
The Minions, what movie is that from again?
Despicable Me.
Despicable Me. Yeah, I was never into that movie.
No.
Yeah, Minions, I appreciate the suggestion, but one thing they did mention, whether you're a wrestler or a wrestling fan, we do have quite a handful of wrestlers that listen to the show. So shout out to all the wrestlers, and hopefully if they listen to this, you know, I can provide some insight that may be helpful for them and their career. So big shout out to the wrestlers. But thank you so much again, AJ, for the review.
And big shout out to the wrestling fans as well.
Well, of course. That goes without saying.
Awesome.
That being said...
Sorry, go right ahead, my man.
I think it's time for Marty and Sam's Top 5.
Oh, dearie me.
I still enjoy that.
I still greatly enjoy it. Everyone comments on the World of Sport Wrestling. Nobody comments on that one.
The majority of our audience is in the United States of America. I assume Steptoe and Son wasn't shown in the States. So
they had Sanford and Son. Is that like their version? Is that their US office?
It might be. I don't know. I don't know. People let us know if you like our little intro to Top 5. Sam, you have the keys to the show this week. So tell us all what the Top 5 theme is this week.
We're reviewing Judgment Day 2004, and that features Charlie Haas and Rico. Now, I was looking at them when I was reviewing this, and I just thought, what is better? Well, there's lots of things better, but what is better than an odd couple tag team? And that got me thinking, we could stretch, we could get a top 5 out of this one so easily. And I just thought, I can imagine yours already, by the way. I bet I know them all. I'm going to let you say yours first, and then I'll tell you afterwards if I genuinely had them. I'll give you one for free. You've got Kane and X-Pac in there. I know that.
Wow.
But we will see. Let's hear it.
Okay, so my list, I have tried to make it, at least my number 5 and number 4, like a little less obvious answers.
Okay.
And there's certainly teams that I'm missing out that probably deserve to be on this list. But it's my list, and yeah, I want this to be different to maybe other lists that are out there. Do you know what I mean? Honorable mention to New Jack and Shark Boy in TNA. Yes, hilarious tag team in TNA. New Jack, when you watch him in ECW, he pretty much did the same thing the whole entire time. And then he actually did like such a different act in TNA. And him being in a tag team with Shark Boy, they did so many comedy segments. And I remember this one where Shark Boy was in a paddling pool and he was asking New Jack to get in it with him and just all this funny stuff. And it was just like New Jack actually has like so much more depth than he's known for or showed in ECW. And I thought he showed it with this tag team with Shark Boy. And you assume a tag team like this, they probably just threw the two guys together because they didn't know what to do with either of them. And I always think it's beautiful when that happens and the guys can actually make it work. Do you know what I mean? And those guys certainly did. So honorable mention, Shark Boy and New Jack. So here it is, the top 5 odd couple tag teams. Number 5, Kurt Angle and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, I'm sure they teamed up, maybe not complete tag team, but they were certainly together and associated with each other and certainly played that odd couple. There's no doubt of that. They were an odd couple. This was Austin when he was heel, which I'm sure most of the listeners know. I was not a fan of the Austin heel turn. I personally think that it started the downfall of the professional wrestling business. That being said, there were a bunch of highlights from Austin's heel run. And I think everyone remembers this couple in particular, his interactions with Kurt Angle. Kurt, for someone that wasn't a massive pro wrestling fan and came from a different background, it's just so astonishing how quickly he picked up the actual physical part of pro wrestling, the psychology part, but also just how much depth he had as a character. And he could do all this comedy and make you laugh so much, but then, a minute later, wound you up where you want to see him get his ass kicked. Like, it's such a good act. And the fact that, a lot of times if a wrestler starts doing comedy, you think, okay, it can only get them a certain way up the card. But Kurt Angle managed to do it, but still keep his legitimacy, still,
intact.
Still be perceived as dangerous and still was able to do it as a main eventer. And obviously Austin, main eventer. So these two together, we all remember the little cowboy hats. We all remember the guitar, the singing with Steve Austin. So Kurt Angle and Stone Cold Steve Austin are my number 5.
I didn't have them on my version of your list.
There we go. That's why
you got me already.
I'm thinking outside the box a little bit.
All right.
My number 4, Eddie Guerrero and Chyna. Now, I'm sure they obviously teamed up, but again, it's more of they were an odd couple.
Yeah.
I remember at the time just being so intrigued by this storyline. I feel like this storyline doesn't get covered enough. And it might be because both the individuals have passed on now, maybe. I don't know why, because I just thought this was pure gold. Because when people talk about Eddie Guerrero, they'll talk about, some of his classic matches in ECW and WCW, and then they'll talk about the SmackDown 6 and maybe him as world champion, but they don't really ever bring up this angle with Chyna, which I actually think was some of his best work of his whole entire career. And what was great about it is Eddie's a heel, Chyna's a babyface, and you think no, why would she be interested in him? And then you kind of realize, love conquers all. Do you know what I mean? And it is like real life. Do you know what I mean? There'll be the lady that you like, and she'll like the jerk.
The bad guy, the bad boy, yeah.
It makes sense. But I thought they just did such a good angle with this, and they had so many twists and turns, and they got to the point with Chyna where they didn't really know what to do with her. Just kind of what do we do? The problem is she couldn't really wrestle women because she just had to kill everyone. So then they started having her wrestle men. But teaming up with Eddie, he got to see a whole new side out of Chyna. Yeah. This is when Eddie first started to really get to show his personality in the WWE. Before this, he done the Radicals and mainly just wrestled. I really feel like this was the start of Eddie's kind of rise in the WWE. But I just remember watching this as a kid and just being enamored with this whole entire storyline. So
Mamacita,
absolutely. Mamacita. My number 3, you guessed it, X-Pac and Kane. Again, I keep talking about watching wrestling when I was younger and how it made me feel. I was the biggest X-Pac fan as a kid. I still am now. And before this, Kane had been very protected as a top guy and for the majority kind of an evil monster. So the idea of teaming up with X-Pac was just, really out of the box. It probably shouldn't have worked, but it absolutely did. And I remember being a kid and being at school, and I had a friend that was a lot bigger than me. So it's like, you're Kane, I'm X-Pac, and like pretending to be them. And I also remember being genuinely heartbroken. And there's been a few times as a kid where I was like really heartbroken from wrestling. And it was when X-Pac and Kane lost the tag titles to Big Show and Undertaker. I think it was at SummerSlam, because I was so worried about, I was actually worried about this match coming. Like, oh no, they haven't faced someone like Undertaker and Big Show yet. Like this might be the time they lose. I'm like, no. And sure enough, I was trying to convince myself, no, they'll be fine. And sure enough, they lost. And I was, like I said, actually kind of heartbroken. And then I kind of got heartbroken again when X-Pac turned on Kane. So, but I don't think Kane's career would have went the way it did. Maybe it would have done, but this was the first time he showed a different side to the Kane character, which he needed to do. You can't stay doing the same thing all the time when there's 52 weeks a year of TV. And at the same time, with X-Pac, I think it helped elevate X-Pac. And WWE, there was no cruiserweight division or anything else. So I feel like this team with Kane was kind of like the perfect sort of spot for X-Pac. So yeah, of course, X-Pac and Kane, my number 3.
Do you remember when you said that do you remember when you said that Kane is like the ultimate tag team whore? For odd couple tag teams, you could put Kane in multiple times, I guess, couldn't you, if you think about it?
So, spoiler alert, Kane and Daniel Bryan aren't in my list, and I think most people's odd couples list, Team Hell No, Kane and Daniel Bryan would be in there.
Been there.
But that's kind of why I didn't put them in my list, because I just didn't want my list to be cookie cutter 101. Do you know what I mean? But in that time of wrestling, I didn't see much of it. The stuff I did see was very, very good. Of course, Danielson, one of the best wrestlers in the last 20 years, no doubt. And that definitely gave new life to Kane. And people got really into that storyline. So, but if you think about it, it kind of was, this X-Pac and Kane tag team kind of laid the foundations for a tag team like that to happen. So similar dynamic, but they kind of took it steps further, and it kind of went into that comedy realm, and they did it very well. So shout out to them. My number 2, again, an obvious one, Booker T and Goldust. I still from time to time will go back and watch some of these Booker T and Goldust skits. And yeah, the dynamic was hilarious. Obviously, you couldn't create 2 more different characters, and they obviously played up on that, and they made themselves sort of even more different. And that's kind of the charm of an odd couple tag team, where the people are watching, they're not getting on, they are so different, but then watching them kind of grow into the point where like they're not such an odd couple, or they're not so different, or they find similarities. It's kind of like a beautiful story and great character development. And they certainly did that with Booker T and Goldust. And I honestly think this was the first time that WWE maybe thought, okay, Booker T is a real superstar, because he really, showed so much depth, so much character work and everything else. And he had done before, but I think here with Goldust, it was pretty next level. And again, like, who came up with this tag team? Who came up with this idea? And I do like when wrestling takes risks like this. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not an obvious choice, but they gave it a go, and the guys ran with it and made it something. And you think about this, before this, or even during it, like, Booker T was in the NWO, and it ended up being a better storyline or better pitch for him teaming up with Goldust than being in the New World Order. Do you know what I mean? So that obviously just speaks like how well they did with this. But they get extra points just because how funny it was and how well they managed to kind of tell that story. I think they end up paying it off with them winning the tag team titles and stuff. So extra points for that. And coming in at number 1, greatest odd couple of all time, or odd couple tag team, the Rock and Sock connection. And this, again, this kind of just comes down to how they made me feel as a kid. And I was so invested in the Rock and Mankind's feud and everything they did. And that I Quit match from the Royal Rumble 1999, where the Rock basically kills Mick Foley. I must have watched that match 100 times. I was obsessed with that because I thought the Rock was so cool. Even though he was the heel, I was still kind of going for the Rock. But I loved Mick Foley and Mankind too. So then when the Rock turned babyface, I was like so happy and excited. And then Mick Foley, Mankind, starts, trying to team up with the Rock. Like, just the perfect way they did it. How the Rock, he has no interest in teaming up with Mick Foley. And, why would he? Look at all the history they have of each other. And they just played the storyline so well. I mean, that segment they did, the Rock, This Is Your Life, which if you go and watch back, is actually not very good at all. I didn't think so anyway. It's very long, but
I don't remember this.
Yeah, they did. Mick Foley did the Rock, This Is Your Life, a segment in the ring, and where he brought out a bunch of like people from the Rock's past, but it went really long. They went super duper over on time. But it ended up doing, I'm not sure if it was the highest rated thing ever, but it was in the top 3 or top 5 highest rated segment in Raw history. So, obviously business was booming back then. But yeah, I was just so obsessed with the Rock and Sock connection. And I think, again, just the Rock as a megastar, if he can't always be in the main event or the world title picture just constantly. So when he has to dip out of it, I thought this was a great way for him to do so. And the same thing with Mick Foley as well. But yeah, my number 1, the Rock and Sock connection.
They were in my list of yours for sure. How could they not be in there?
How could they not be?
It.
Pretty much
good list, man. Yeah,
mine are all pretty much from pretty much the same era.
Yeah,
there's like a 3-year span between them all.
Okay, my number 5, RVD and Sabu. Okay, so this is number 5 because it's not a very well-defined odd couple in that they kind of perform similarly as competitors, but their personalities. So Sabu's like a wild card, hothead, insane guy, and RVD is like the opposite, right? He's like the chilled out guy. So just like their kind of like attitudes towards goals are aligned, but their goals are aligned, but their attitudes and how they go to like reach those goals are polar opposites. And I just thought that was a nice dynamic. That's only number 5 because it's not super clearly defined, and it's also not that hilarious. It didn't spell like many comedy segments from it, but I just thought I just thought they were good enough to be in there to give them a shout out. Number 4, Tajiri and William Regal. Now, less of a proper tag team, but this is more one of those definitely an odd couple and hilarious comedy segments. Now, this is number 4 because, again, like RVD and Sabu, I don't find it too strongly defined because to me, they're both kind of like, there's no real like straight man. They're both hilarious kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? So again, it's a little bit weaker, but it provided so much entertainment that for me, it has to be in there. Number 3, I've got Head Cheese.
Yeah, I almost had them. Yeah.
So my number 3, my number 2, and my number 1 are very similar. Like the dynamic is the same in each of them. You've got a very clearly defined straight man who's just like always at their wits' end with the wacky sidekick. So all 3 of mine fit the exact same mold, unfortunately. But for me, that's just, maybe I'm really simple, but that's where I get my laughs from. Well, so go on.
It seems like pretty much most odd couple tag teams
need that.
It seems like they all end up doing comedy. And the only one I can see in my list I mean, Eddie in China wasn't really that much comedy, and X-Pac and Kane wasn't, but the others are. And all of yours so far seem to be, go down that route. I did think of Head Cheese.
Well, RVD and Sabu, not really.
Oh, true. No, you're right. They didn't do but it was. I mean, it just what they were doing was funny. Like seeing how annoyed Sabu would get with Van Damme in the promo segments was kind of funny, but they weren't like deliberately trying to be goofy or anything.
Not wacky hijinks.
Right. Yeah. But I thought about Head Cheese because it was enjoyable, but I didn't think they were that successful as a team, so it kind of took some points down for them.
I understand. Fair enough. But they did kill Chester McCheeserton with a guillotine leg drop.
Didn't they have like the cheese hats at some point?
Yeah, I think so. I think
they had the big cheese block hats. That's all I really remember from Head Cheese. Yeah.
Okay. Number 2 is Charlie Haas and Rico. Now, hang on. Right. Okay. Exactly. Okay. I don't really want to talk about this until we get to the part in the pay-per-view review, because I want to hear, let's just move on. But we definitely have to talk about Charlie Haas and Rico. There's a reason why they're in here. My number 1 is, go on.
Booker T and Goldust.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Like you, I'm thinking about all of these, and really, Booker T and Goldust are the only ones out of my top 5 where I actually go back and watch them, like you said, on YouTube. Their segments, they're that good. And like you said, there's a nice little arc to it. So, for example, I think, wasn't it like Booker T, NWO, like weren't good to him or something, and he finds out like Goldust really was his true friend all along, that kind of stuff. And it was nice. It's kind of wholesome, very funny. But like you said, both incredible performers. Booker T, you've never really seen a side to him like that before properly, and he pulls it off just like masterfully. It's so good, and I still watch those segments. They're still in my liked or whatever, like favorites on my YouTube playlist. So for sure, number 1, Odd Couple Tag Team, Booker T and Goldust.
Just to go further into that, and I said earlier, I feel like this is when WWE really saw him as a superstar. Let me go a little deeper into that. So Booker T, obviously, he'd been in the dying years of WCW. He'd been a main eventer, a world champion. What was it? Five-time world champion. And he came into the WWE, WWF, and they pretty much brought him in on top, wrestling guys like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. And he was pretty much like the figurehead of the Invasion and everything else. So fast forward to this, when they turn around and be like, okay, you're going to be in essentially a comedy tag team with Goldust. He could have looked at that as like a step down. Do you know what I mean? From what he'd been doing previously. But instead, he's like, oh, I'm going to completely throw myself into this. I'm going to get this over. I'm going to be the star of the show in this tag team and show, the world what I can do. And he did. And I think that's when they were like, okay, we can give this guy anything and he's going to make it work. And this probably, inevitably led to him doing like the King Booker thing and everything else. He obviously built that trust in the WWE probably through this whole deal. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think, it definitely helped his career for sure, Booker T's. The thing I remember most is Booker T, that segment where he ends up in bed with Goldust and he's like running out and he's naked, is just absolutely hilarious. So I honestly, when Booker T was wrestling, I wasn't really the biggest fan. I don't know why. I just wasn't really that into him. But now going back and watching Booker T, I have like more of an appreciation for him. Now I actually really do enjoy going back and watching Booker T. So I'm more of a fan now of Booker T than I was when he was active, which is pretty funny. But yeah, and obviously this was a big part of it.
Do you remember when you asked me who is your favorite wrestler who never won the championship? And I said Booker T. And you were like, mate, do you know 5 times? Do you know what he's referring to when he says? Well,
he's more than 5 times. I think because he was 5 times in WCW. Then he won the world title in WWE. Yeah, that's great.
All
that's
right.
Great. Well, Sam, we are getting to the holidays, the festive season, and I know what the holidays and the festive season could look like for people, right? You're going to put on a few pounds, that's for sure. You've got your mother's cooking, there's chocolates everywhere, Thanksgiving, Christmas dinner, if you drink red wine, all this stuff, there's just so much temptation. And, it's good to indulge every now and then. Absolutely. You want to enjoy yourself, and you can. Absolutely. But that brings me on to our sponsor, Legacy Sups. And you know what, Sam? Do you know one of my favorite sups from Legacy Sups is the X Lean 5? It's a fat burner. And these things, for me, they're pretty vital because you know how much I love chocolate and bread and cheese and meat. So taking a fat burner that actually works is very important for me. The X Lean 5 Fat Burner. This formula comprises 5 key thermogenic and lipogenic ingredients to target fat cells combined with an energy and focus blend. You want to get the most out of your workouts. Do you know what I mean? You want to take advantage of all the benefits that this blend has to offer. So you combine this with a calorie deficit diet and sort of high intensity exercise or whatever sort of cardiovascular you like to do, whatever your regime is. This is the perfect combination. And like I said, during hard times like now and Christmas, you're gonna put on the pounds. So we need to get active and doing something so we don't get it too out of hand. On the same subject, we know how important sleep is in this day and age. I want to ask the listeners, are you having trouble sleeping? Do you feel always tired? It's time to try Recovery PM and see why thousands of customers keep coming back for more. Yes, recovery and quality sleep are often the most overlooked ways to make significant gains in muscle mass and fat loss. You can change that by adding Recovery PM to your nightly routine. I don't think people realize this, but they'll be in the gym pumping the weights and bodybuilding, but your body's not going to grow if you don't have that correct rest. Sleep is so important. It comes back to everything, just your general health, your stress levels, your focus. Lack of sleep will reduce your testosterone. All these things. Sleep is so important. And the thing is, most over-the-counter sleep aids are just melatonin, right? The problem with that is if you can't relax and fall asleep in the first place, then melatonin is just going to make you cranky. I'm sure you've felt that before. Recovery PM is a professional blend of 9 clinically proven natural sleep aids and tranquilizers, plus magnesium. So you're going to relax first, then you experience deep sleep and wake up refreshed and ready to attack the day. Your whole life is affected by lack of sleep, your work, your relationships, your mood, your performance, and for men in particular, poor quality sleep has a significant effect on testosterone levels, like I previously mentioned. There was actually a Chicago study that found that men who slept 5 hours or less just for 1 week suffered a decrease in testosterone by 10 to 15%. Can you believe that? And that's why Recovery PM is a part of the Ultimate Test Stack, which is also available at Legacy Sups. So, what are you waiting for? Just for listening to this show, you can save yourself 10% off all Legacy Sups. So get yourself over to legacysups.com and use the promo code VILLAIN, that's VILLAIN, for 10% off just for listening to this show. That's legacysups.com, legacysups.com, and level up with Legacy. With that being said, I think it's time for us to get in today's review, Judgment Day 2004. Sam, you've got the keys. Tell us where we're at.
It's May 2004. We're in Los Angeles, okay? The Staples Center to be precise, with 18,721 other screaming fans. This is Judgment Day, which we should add is a SmackDown exclusive pay-per-view. Remember the branded pay-per-views?
Yeah.
But they were really pushing the branded pay-per-views, and I remember Judgment Day being very clearly a SmackDown one.
Yeah.
Judgment Day was also one of those suffixes to in your house, I believe, originally. Do you know what I'm Remember you were
Correct.
talking to us about those?
Yeah.
And then it became its own pay-per-view.
Yes.
This is the 2004 edition of Judgment Day. Now, I said 18,722 people in attendance, which they say is sold out. I'll take their word for that. I'll take the WWE's word for that. Why would they lie to me? What do you reckon the buy rate was? 2004 WWE.
What was the date of the show?
It's May 16th, 2004.
Okay. It's a SmackDown.
And this is a branded pay-per-view.
Right. SmackDown only branded pay-per-view. Obviously, I've seen the card. WWE still doing decent numbers here, but I think when they did the, SmackDown only branded pay-per-views, I think they didn't do as well. I'm going to say 230,000 buys.
Yes, 235,000 buys. But you give me a 5,000 or 10,000 margin of error so we can have it. Now, that clearly didn't shock you. That shocked me. I thought it was going to be a lot lower.
WWE, you got to remember, they still were 2004, still kind of riding high and everything else. Okay. But they were still doing pretty good numbers. But
one thing that you won't be able to guess, though, is it has a tagline to it. Do you know what this was? It's awful. Souls will cry.
Souls will cry? I don't know. I thought they always, the Judgment Day, I remember the original one, or maybe the 1998 one, they'd always make a big deal of Judgment Day, and it would have the voiceover like, Judgment Day is upon us.
Yes.
And it is
I'll get to that.
Yeah, it is really, I don't want to go too far off track, but it is funny how now in the year 2023, one of the hottest things in wrestling is named after a B pay-per-view from the 2000s for WWE.
A former in your house. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
The program begins with a tacked-on warning that WWE characters are fictitious and don't reflect the personal lives of the actors portraying them, so nobody has a go at JBL for being racist. But because the warning card was baked into the programming over 4 years ago, it references the parental control settings of the WWE network despite being on Peacock now. Whoops. First mistake. Following this is another warning about the same thing, only presented in a different font and manner. We get it. However, this "don't judge us or our actors" message is undermined 5 seconds later with an opening package about how people will be judged by their actions, because this is Judgment Day, and that the wicked will be condemned. This mixed messaging means I don't know if I'm supposed to condemn the wicked or not, but as I'm from the internet, I should probably blindly go with my gut. What's JBL's Twitter handle? I really feel compelled to bring something up that isn't real from 2 decades ago that I don't understand. Luckily, the video is over quickly. It's not the best. It wasn't the best WWE have ever done, but it's exactly how you said it was, right?
Yeah,
that thing. Was. We then, though, one thing that I did like, we then see the stage, which has when the Titantron screen isn't on, it represents a full moon, and it has large white waxy looking crosses hanging from the rafters and a sort of cemetery fence gangway. Marty, what do you think of the Judgment Day 2004 stage? Because I know you love the stage designs. It's your thing.
Yeah, I'm all, I love just themed sets, full stop.
Yeah.
I think that was part of the charm and the excitement of watching a pay-per-view back then. It's what's the set going to look like? And how can they get creative this time? And also, I felt like it made it so much more easier to kind of individualize the pay-per-views and remember which one was which, just because they had such a different look. Whereas now, everything has the same look, so it all kind of just merges into one. But back then,
that's a good point. Yeah.
Backlash. Oh, I know what that was. Whatever it was, the Judgment Day or Halloween Havoc, whatever it is. I think the sets. I get why they don't do them. It's a big expense, but for me,
I think it's worth it.
I think it's worth it. I totally do. But this one, Judgment Day, it was cool. And this was kind of we reviewed Halloween Havoc the other day. This is kind of a spooky type theme. And I liked it. It worked well.
It was funny that it was a spooky themed pay-per-view set in May, and they kept cutting to outside of the Staples Center. It's just broad. It's midday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to begin, the opener, Rey Mysterio, RVD, teaming up to take on the Dudley Boys. Rey is dressed like one of the low down the list alternative casual costumes that King would have in Tekken, but he pulls it off. He then takes off his shirt to reveal a tight black vest and looked better with the shirt on, I think, which I know you won't agree with. But what we can agree on is Bubba Ray's shorts were far too short and they looked like hot pants. I could calibrate the white balance of my monitor on his pasty legs. RVD takes the win in 15 minutes and 17 seconds. This was a good opener, not a great opener.
So when the Dudley Boys wore the blue tie-dye, that was cool.
Yeah.
When the Dudley Boys wore kind of like the original camouflage or traditional camouflage, that was cool. I could not get with the Dudley Boys wearing yellow. And clearly they were trying to like mix things up, but I feel like the yellow did not work for them. And
they look like a couple of like when you hire a moving van or something.
Yeah. You know? It was very off-putting, I thought. The whole run with yellow was just, to me, very off-putting. But no, this match. So there's a handful of matches on this pay-per-view which kind of shows you like why the single branded pay-per-views are maybe not the best idea. This match, it was a fine match. I thought it was a little slow and it took a while to get going considering who was in it. You know, all obviously good workers. And then you've got Mysterio and Van Dam, like two of the, you know, best high flyers ever. You know how I'm not into gimmick matches. I'm not into tables matches. I will say this, because this match had like no stakes, it wasn't for the tag team championships or anything. I actually felt like this match could have been helped by being like a tables match or something. I feel like that would have made it far more exciting, because to me, this just seemed like a match that could have been easily on SmackDown. And I feel like there's a handful of matches on this show. I'm just like, why are they having this match? Like, it didn't seem like there was any real story. They didn't have a recap beforehand. It was not for a championship. So to me, I just kind of felt like, why should I care? And the guys kind of worked hard, but like there was no real, I felt, you know, other than like, oh, I want to see the good guys win. There was no real story to it.
You are right. A lot of these matches did feel just like they were SmackDown episode TV matches. You
know, Rey Mysterio is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time.
Yeah.
And he can do some amazing things in the ring. I just never understood why Rey Mysterio busted out the Bronco Buster every now and then. It always seemed a bit out of place for Rey Mysterio. And obviously one of my other favorite wrestlers of all time is X-Pac. And for him, it worked. I was never really the biggest fan of it. It wasn't something where when he did it when I was younger, I'd be like, yeah, awesome. But when Rey did it, I was always kind of like, why is he doing that?
Well, it works for X-Pac because he's like cocky and annoying.
And he's saying suck it constantly. Yeah.
And he's saying suck it. So like it makes sense why he does it. Right? Like you kind of think he's above that.
Yeah. So, and I remember once, for whatever reason, I remember wrestling was when I was young, and I like to take this buckle in the corner, kind of like a Bronco Buster, but I would like, the guy would move and I would like bounce out and do this big bump. But I wanted to like hit a Bronco Buster before that to kind of, you know, establish it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember hitting a Bronco Buster in a match. I was like super young at this point. And one of the veterans kind of pulled me aside afterwards and was like, oh, everything you did was great. It's like, but the Bronco Buster, I kind of feel like you're better than that. Like you can do all this great stuff. Like, why are you doing a Bronco Buster? And I was like, I think you're right. And I never did a Bronco Buster ever again. So
who is the guy who tries to interview Booker T after the match?
It was Josh Matthews, I believe.
Okay. You're wrong. He's actually the physical embodiment of the early 2000s.
I literally have in my notes Josh Matthews looking very 2004, pink shirts and like diamond earrings or something.
Two diamond studs, and one in each ear, and the bleached blonde hair and everything. Yep.
Yeah, the tips. Yeah.
Yeah. Frosted tips. Yeah. Early 2000s walks in on Booker, who is standing in a summoning circle within the saddest dressing room I've ever seen. It has no furniture in it for them to put their clothes in. Booker has a voodoo pouch that he claims has the power to defeat the Undertaker. And by claims, I mean bellows into the face of early 2000s from a mere 5 inches away. Following that, Kurt Angle makes his way to the stage and materializes from a raising contraption in a wheelchair. You mentioned this earlier, like it just constantly surprises me how Kurt can do the stupidest stuff with a completely straight face and just pull everything off like flawlessly.
I completely forgot that Kurt Angle was the general manager at some point for WWE or for SmackDown.
GM of SmackDown, yeah.
Yeah, I assume, he was injured. I have it's so funny how reoccurring the old heels on wheels is. Like, it's so many times in wrestling they'll have a heel in a wheelchair. I mean, actually, they're doing it right now in AEW with Roderick Strong. I'm pretty sure he's in a wheelchair. Like, it's always been like an occurring theme, and it just gets so, for whatever reason, just being in a wheelchair you'd think would get you sympathy, but in wrestling it just gets you heat. Like, it's the opposite.
It's great, isn't it?
Right? People hate them in wheelchairs, so I call it heels on wheels. I don't know if that's an official term, but I didn't realize that Kurt Angle was part of that club. But yeah, heels on wheels. We'll make a shout out of that.
He has a heavy push, a massive, massive box all the way down the entrance ramp to the ring. And then it's like a lift, an elevator, and Kurt Angle pops up from the top.
They used that earlier for Rey Mysterio's entrance.
Was that the same box?
Yeah, they just used it again, yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, there you go. They spent so much on the stage, they cut costs by doubling up, which is a very wise thing to do.
Yeah.
He does the cheap location-based heat, so of course I'm all in on that. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, okay, Kurt, so he's in a wheelchair because he has a broken leg, okay, in the story. But on that broken leg, did you notice he has his shoe on the broken leg, which is in a cast, and it's tied up with a lace, okay? Now, when people have broken legs, they never have their shoe on, right? Because their leg is broken. Now, I don't know if you remember, but it's revealed later on in the year or like a few weeks later that Kurt was faking his leg injury.
Oh, okay.
So was that shoe on the tied up on the like amazing foreshadowing or just a mistake? Because it's like amazing foreshadowing and writing and foresight if it was like a clue that he's faking his injury because he has his shoe on the broken leg.
I think you're giving it too much credit, I think.
I'm happy to do that and pretending that was deliberate. And if so, that's bravo. He blames Tori for his broken leg and says she will be fired if she doesn't win against Dawn Marie, which sets up our next match where Tori Wilson defeats Dawn Marie in a little over 6 minutes. Did you notice fierce patriot and American hero Kurt Angle is supposed to be in an America-themed wheelchair, but they knew it was supposed to have red, white, and blue on it, but they did those colors vertically in the wrong order, and he's actually in a wheelchair that's displaying the French flag.
I did not notice that.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Fierce American patriot Kurt Angle is in a French flag wheelchair. You painted those and called it a day.
You didn't mention Luther Reigns, who was with Kurt Angle. And
I didn't recognize who that was.
I kind of forgot about him. It's so funny, like in the mid-2000s, specifically it feels like on SmackDown, but I guess across the board of both shows, there was so many like big guys that they brought in that they tried to do stuff with, but it just never paid off. And Luther Reigns is they always seem kind of like generic kind of big guys, and Luther Reigns always comes to mind. But they tried it with loads of guys, and Matt Morgan, Mordecai, who we'll see later in the show, Nathan Jones, all these different guys in the mid 2000s that they were there for like a minute, a cup of coffee, and then somebody was like, nope, they're not getting it, and they got rid of them. So, but Luther Reigns, I always thought he had somewhat potential, but this match, there's only one thing to say about this match, and I'm still trying to work out if it was deliberate or an accident. And what I'm talking about is one point, Tori gives Dawn Marie a schoolboy and has a wardrobe malfunction, but basically her gear like rips, and her tights are basically down her hips, and her ass is fully out. But the reason why I feel like they maybe were trying to do the spot, but just to like pull the tights down slightly so the butt would be out, but then pulling the tights actually ripped them and exploded the tights, because then Dawn Marie, she's wrestling with like nothing on the front either other than a thong, and then her butt's out, and it didn't seem deliberate to rip the tights, because straight away her butt's out and she's all like pretty much naked, and she just stops Tori Wilson right away. And I feel like if they planned the spot, she would have maybe sold, being naked more. So yeah, it was pretty bizarre. But yeah, 6 minutes, that was probably too long for this match. I know Tori was very popular, but yeah, not the greatest match. And the only thing I can say about it is Dawn Marie's gear exploding and basically wrestling pretty much naked.
Yeah. Match of the night. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. After that, we go straight to Scotty 2 Hotty in a shirt of the pay-per-view we are watching, which you let us know tells us his place on the roster, against Colonel Sanders, who in his debut, I believe, squashes Scotty, but manages to cut his own lip at the same time. So Mordecai defeats Scotty 2 Hotty instantly. It's like 3 minutes, but seriously, it was like instantly. However, before we get into the match, Marty, I'm pretty sure the Peacock version is censored, because I have the DVD version, and I remember a JBL promo before this match where he does some anti-immigrant sentiment, and it's not on this Peacock version.
They probably would cut that out. They didn't cut out in the Dudley Boys and Van Dam Mysterio match. Bubba gets Rey Mysterio in a tree of woe, and he's like hitting him in the tree of woe, and he's calling him like a piñata. That was
I didn't notice.
Yeah, that was still in the
Peacock censors didn't notice either. Then, yeah,
I guess they didn't notice. Well, yeah, this was a squash match. This was Mordecai's debut, and do you know the story of Mordecai at all?
No. I know who he becomes.
Sure. So Kevin Ford, or his name's Kevin Fertig or something. I think he'd been in OVW, and he'd been doing dark matches for WWE for quite some time, like maybe like a year or so, just doing dark matches. And then he finally had a meeting with Vince McMahon, and he was in a tag team as well. Actually, he was in a tag team, I think, with Tyson Tomko, who we've seen on the show before. And I think and he also was a tag team with Sin, and they did some kind of like, spooky gimmick, whatever, or they're devils, whatever it was. And as a meeting with Vince McMahon, and Vince says, I don't need tag teams, I need single stars. Like, what's your singles pitch? And Kevin Ford comes out with this whole Mordecai character, where the idea that it would, punish people for their sins and everything else. And essentially, I think the gimmick really was supposed to be like the white version of the Undertaker. If Undertaker wears all black, this is your white. Like, there was also rumors that he was actually going to be, they were going to tie him as a part of the Undertaker and Kane's like lineage and family, which I think would have helped quite a lot. And Kevin suggests that the idea was to lead to a match at WrestleMania, Undertaker versus Mordecai. Now, the Mordecai concept I thought was really, really cool. And I actually remember at the time being really, really excited about it. And I just, because Kane had been so cool, and I was always obsessed when I was younger with stuff like this with Undertaker. Like, I was excited when they did Undertaker versus Undertaker. Do you know what I mean? Which was terrible. So I think it's just because I loved the fighting games when I was young, like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. And it's kind of almost like that. Like, are we going to see Sub-Zero versus Scorpio? You know what I mean? So I was pumped for it. This match with Mordecai, it was not an impressive debut. And I think the reason being, he was relatively aggressive, but with this gimmick, Kevin or Mordecai, he needed to have more impact in his moves and more explosiveness. Like, the only 2 times he bumps Scotty 2 in this, right at the finish, he gives him a short arm clothesline, and then he picks him up and gives him his finish, which is like a razor's edge, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But he needed to be far more impressive than that. He needed to be throwing little Scotty 2 all over the ring. He needed to be gorilla pressing him, overhead belly to belly suplex, like whatever, gut wrench suplex, German, whatever it might be. He needed to really be throwing him around and really showing his power and everything else. But instead, he was like, choking on the ropes and holding him against the ring post. And I get what he was trying to do, but it just didn't really work. And I think in the lead up to this, he'd been working Scotty 2 on the house shows. And it was probably one of those cases where he wanted to be respectful to Scotty. And like, obviously Scotty is the veteran and, was a big star at one point, and he's coming in new. And maybe Mordecai didn't want to be like, yeah, I'm just going to kick your ass and bump you 100 times. So it really, one of the agents should have said, okay, Scotty, we apologize. But tonight's not your night. This is for Kevin. This is what we need for the show. We need you to make him look like $1 million, and Scotty, you'll have your time. Tonight is Mordecai's time. That's just how you have to put it. I've been in that situation before where I've had to tell people, okay, tonight you're doing, it's for them. It's an 80-20 match to them, whatever it might be. And yeah, so it did not really work, and the crowd was pretty much silent. I will say this, Mordecai is one of those things in wrestling where people will say like, oh, it was so bad, and oh, what a terrible gimmick. I never thought it was that. I didn't think it was particularly good, but I didn't think it was bad. And I actually thought the concept for it was good, a good concept. I think he had this match. Then he had the next pay-per-view, he wrestled Hardcore Holly in like a 50-50 match. And then the next week on SmackDown, he wrestled Rey Mysterio.
What's a 50-50 match?
Like an even match, like an even Stevens match.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah.
Like where both wrestlers are seen on, you know what I mean?
Come off, it's okay.
Yeah. And then he had the match on SmackDown against Rey Mysterio, where he lost to Rey Mysterio, and then he was gone and never seen again. Now, there's sort of conflicting stories about this. Kevin Thorne suggests that during this first, this push, whatever, he got into a bar fight and basically some guy tried to start some trouble with him. He ended it, but this guy, so I guess he beat up this guy, and this guy found out that he was a WWE superstar, assumed he was rich, and then, did a lawsuit, and they were suing Mordecai and suing WWE. So Mordecai says that WWE killed the gimmick because of this lawsuit, and they didn't want to draw any more attention to him and everything else. But I do remember listening to the Bruce Pritchard podcast, and he suggests that Mordecai he was too slow and not fast enough, and he wanted to wrestle like the Undertaker so much, but they guess had a vision for him that Mordecai couldn't do. I don't think he wrestled like the Undertaker personally, though I do see the similarities in the character. Because I thought this gimmick was so a good idea, I just don't think Kevin was the right guy for it. I was trying to think in my head, like, who else could have done this gimmick at this time? Like, who would have actually been viable? And I was thinking, I don't know if this would have worked, but in 2004, Sean O'Haire was still in WWE. I think it was in developmental at that point. Like they'd sent him back to developmental. I think he'd had a few problems. So this is probably unrealistic, but he had, grown his hair out and had a cool, goatee and everything else. And to be honest with you, his Devil's Advocate gimmick, which they scrapped, kind of similar. There's some similarities with this gimmick, but he looked impressive and he could be big and powerful in the ring. So I felt like if they'd given the gimmick to Sean O'Haire and he dyed himself all white and everything else, brought him in, repackaged him as Mordecai, like seeing him work with Undertaker at WrestleMania could have been really, really cool. But for some reason, I was just thinking, who was around at that time? I was thinking, it was like maybe Mike Awesome, but maybe he's too established as that. I'm just trying to think who could have done this role. But yeah, this is the match that, well, other than the main event, this is the match that I think about when we talk about this show. Yeah. If someone says Judgment Day 2004, I'm like, oh, Mordecai.
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
I don't agree with you that so a palette swap of an existing character for me just isn't enough to be interesting. And like Kane, for example, isn't that. Do you know what I mean? That's why he's so interesting. He's wholly unique.
I disagree with you.
Just like a white. You think Kane is the same as the Undertaker, just a red version?
That was the idea, yeah. Did you ever see any of Mordecai's like vignettes? Because the character was different to the Undertaker.
No, I haven't. I've only seen him from Judgment Day 2004. But in the name of the pay-per-view, I'm allowed to judge him just by that.
Well, his character definitely it wasn't complete rip-off of Undertaker, despite what you think. I feel like his outfit and the robe,
it looked a bit Party City.
The robe especially looked cheap. If you're going to do this gimmick, like, you got to invest in it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
His robe should have looked like amazing, and it looked kind of thin and, like you said, like a costume. So that just from the get-go hurt the gimmick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And it also didn't help that he looks exactly. So he has a hood on, so you can't see that he's got long hair, but he's got the exact same facial structure, and all white adornment of Colonel Sanders from KFC fame, which doesn't help his spooky credentials.
Yeah, the white. If the thing is, if it's like white hair, that's one thing. But I think the beard and the eyebrows really kind of made it almost comical. Maybe, I don't know. I feel like there's ways they could have done this gimmick, but for whatever reason, it didn't work.
Yeah.
And I feel like somebody probably scrapped it because they felt like it just wasn't working. As well, I'm going to guess.
Felt the same way. Yeah. Jacqueline busts into Chavo's locker room to bequeath him a gift of women's underwear, but not for him to enjoy, but for him to wear, because if he's going to be beaten by a woman, he's got to look like a woman. And then he gives that outfit to Chavo Classic, who then gets enjoyment out of them. And that's a funny segment. Okay?
Well, it's 2 weeks. Was it? Oh, no, it wasn't last week, but our last review, Halloween Havoc, we saw the intergender match with Disco and Jacqueline, which has caused quite the debate actually on social media. Lots of people saying, "Oh, why did Disco have a problem putting Jacqueline over?" And a lot of people saying Jacqueline could kick his ass in real life. And I don't really have an opinion on it either way, but I was like, okay, what are you basing that opinion on? Because it seems like you just don't like Disco Inferno, so you assume that Jacqueline can kick his ass. Because he's still got to remember, like, what do we know? It's like, well, he's 100 pounds heavier than Jacqueline and like a foot taller. Do you know what I mean? And you're just assuming that she'll kick his ass because she's tough. I was like, I don't know about that, but it was quite the debate on.
People got very heated about it, and
people hate Disco.
It was, well, I don't. I have no idea why. But let's say that is. I don't think that she could beat him in a real fight in both of their heydays. But let's say that she could. Okay, let's say that she could. This is wrestling. Like, we're not talking about a street fight to the death. We're talking about pro wrestling. So, like, how does that even? We could say that about like all sorts of different matchups at the time, but people got really kind of hung up on this one for some reason. But yeah, we'll get to that more when we get to the match, because obviously it's Chavo's turn, who did lay down. He did, I think, right? She beat him before this match or whatever, but we'll get to that. Anyway, but before then, we get to Charlie Haas and Rico versus Billy Gunn and Hardcore Holly, where Rico and Charlie Haas retain their tag team championship belts in just over 10 minutes. Now, I could tell by your face when we did the top 5, you've got something you really desperately want to pop off about Charlie Haas and Rico not being a great tag team. Let's hear it.
First of all, this match, why is it on pay-per-view? This is a SmackDown match. Like that.
Yeah.
Billy Gunn in 2004 teaming up with Hardcore Holly. Come on, this just screams makeshift. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, Hardcore Holly, great with Crush Holly. Billy Gunn, great as the Smoking Guns, great as the New Age Outlaws.
Yeah.
I'd even say great with Chuck, Billy and Chuck. But this is completely just thrown together. Yeah. Billy Gunn, for whatever reason, when like his whole career, when he wasn't Mr. Arse, it just never seemed to click with him. It seems until like the last year or two, where he's been doing the Daddy Arse thing with the Acclaimed, had like this big resurgence, but he could never seem to step away from the Mr. Arse character. But yeah, this match, I was watching this thinking, surely the first match, the Dudley Boys versus RVD and Rey Mysterio, should have been for the tag team titles. It just seemed really out of place, this, and people's, just weren't really that interested. Here, Rico, they've got him doing the Adrian Street gimmick. And I think he actually spent time with Adrian Street to kind of study to get, ready for this character. Whether this worked or not, that's debatable, but he wasn't doing the Adrian Street character right, if that's what he was trying to do, like at all. He was doing it wrong, right? Like the Adrian Street or exotic Adrian Street character, the whole kind of concept of it was, he was exotic and very flamboyant, but he was also this like aggressive, hard man that would like, bite your nose off and beat you up. And he had Miss Linda with him, and it looked like they were a couple, but then in the ring, he would do things, to be provocative and, even kiss the opponent. So the whole kind of thing with him was like, is he or isn't he? Do you know what I mean? With like everyone, they couldn't work out his sexuality. That was
You're talking about Adrian Street.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like the charm to the character, that mystique, like we were.
Yeah. Well, there's no ambiguity with Rico in this,
right?
The way it's portrayed.
They've put a woman with Rico, but so they're trying to do the same thing, but it's just like, no, he's just full on flamboyant. Do you know what I mean? It's not really any real depth to this character, whereas with the Adrian Street, there was a lot or so much. Do you know what I mean? Which made him so sort of successful and a big draw. With Rico, it's just very like more so black and white. Do you know what I mean? Just like, boom, here it is. And they've tried to team him up with Charlie House. Charlie House, I just spoke about Billy Gunn, only working as Mr. Arse. Charlie House in the team angle with Shelton Benjamin was like the perfect way to use Charlie House. It was like, House was an amazing in-ring performer, but didn't have a lot of charisma. So he was probably never going to be like a top singles guy, but him and Shelton in the tag team, very credible, great tag team. When he wasn't in that tag team, I felt like they never really knew what to do with him. Do you know what I mean? I think that's fair to say. And here they're trying something. I think Haas was actually married to Jackie Gator in real life. So it's probably why they did this. And for what it was, the Rico gimmick at the time, I remember watching it. I did actually quite enjoy. I just thought it was cool. They were doing something with Rico, and I remembered Adrian Street when I was younger. So I was like, oh, cool. And it was enjoyable enough, but I don't think with that character, he could have took it to such, further heights than it did. Do you know what I mean? Like, think about how we think about the Goldust character and like the mark that had in wrestling. But the Rico thing, it's kind of, I don't think many people even remember it. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, he probably wasn't going to be world champion with this, but it could have been a real sort of gimmick that's like stuck in all of our minds and everything else. But I felt like people kind of forget about it. I think when you say Rico, they actually think more of the original Rico, the stylist or whatever, or, the one that was with 3-minute warning. I think people kind of forget this. And for such a loud gimmick, how could people forget it? There must have been some kind of disconnect.
So why I've got them in as a decent odd couple is actually, I think, because of Jackie. Now, I don't know their structure, but the way I kind of understood it, and I could be absolutely wrong about this, was that Jackie wasn't there to still give Rico some ambiguity. I thought that the dynamic was Charlie wants to get with Jackie, and yeah, they're married in real life or whatever. Rico's like her gay best friend, and Charlie's just having to put up with it to get in there, that's how I read it. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but that's how I go in. And I thought that was kind of a very unique, kind of a really funny setup.
Yeah. Do you feel like, do you feel like for years, like WWE's, or maybe wrestling as a whole, presentation of gay people pretty homophobic? Do you think it's fair to say?
Right. Yes. Now, I was going to get to that. Like, there are issues.
Yes.
Right. I like them. However, there are issues. Yes, I do agree with you on that one.
Like the fact that you're like, oh, like the storyline is like he has to put up with Rico. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and but I'm being yes, but I do think like Charlie Huss did. You say he kind of lacked that kind of like charisma level, but I feel like he did portray that very well, which is why I think they did have strengths that they could play off of each other. Now, I know people will probably be annoyed with me doing this, but I am also, this was from 2004, so I am looking at it through that lens. Just like when Dawn Marie, like if it was intentional, her butt comes out. Okay, I can enjoy it because it's from 2004, because I'm looking back on a DVD, which is also why I was upset that JBL's like comments were censored, because also not only is it, again, we're watching it from 2004, but that was some very good heel work. Like, that was a shame that we don't get to see that. So I'm trying to enjoy it from that perspective. And when, you leave, yes, would it fly today? Absolutely not. Okay?
Right,
but we're reviewing something from 2004, and I'm
it's
taking it through that lens. Yeah,
it's like they're trying to erase history, and it's kind of like you kind of need that stuff there to be like, look, you know, this sort of stuff happened back then. This is why we don't do it now. Do you know what I mean? Or people can see kind of, you know, we can learn from it. You know what I mean? Just erasing it from history. I don't know how I feel about that. Do you know what I mean? Because that was something that happened back then. But I guess WWE just, you know, they're trying to cover the image. And to be fair, there's probably lots of kids that watch Peacock and they're trying to watch wrestling, and if they see something like that, like JBL doing kind of like a racial promo, and then they go to school and they're repeating stuff, then, you know, next thing you know, parents are like, okay, we're canceling the network, whatever it is. So from a business standpoint, probably don't want it. From an optic standpoint, probably don't want it. So yeah, I can see kind of both sides. What I always think is funny with wrestling is people all know that it's a show and everyone tells everyone how it's a show, but there still seems to be like lines that they shouldn't cross, because you could watch a movie can come out tomorrow or a TV show with a racist character in it and no one would think it was an issue, right? Well, maybe they would in this day and age, I don't know, but like that's, you know, that's a thing. Like you can have a racist character, but when it's in wrestling, even though people know it's not real, it still seems to be crossing the line. Like, I don't know if you heard about this online, but there was a segment a few weeks ago on the NWA where they had Father James Mitchell like at an angle where he was doing like cocaine out in the audience. He was with like other like wrestlers all doing cocaine. Obviously it was fake or whatever. And it just sparked like a big controversy, and everything else became this whole big thing. And, you know, everyone kind of saying how stupid it was. And they actually think that the rumor is that it lost them a TV deal worth millions of dollars with the CW network. I don't know if that's true or not. But again, see someone in a movie doing cocaine, no problem at all.
Right.
Wrestling still, I think because wrestling still is trying to portray itself as real, even though we know it's not, that's kind of where it becomes kind of difficult, maybe.
But a movie that will have cocaine use in it will probably be targeted towards a certain audience, like age-wise. Whereas wrestling, they have to kind of cover all age categories.
Yeah, I mean, that's another big reason.
That's the only thing I can think of. Yeah.
Sure, totally. But yeah, this match, whatever.
We go to the laziest backstage segment the Undertaker has ever participated in. Then we get repeats of what led up to the Jacqueline Chavo feud, which leads to the match itself for the Cruiserweight Championship, continuing our podcast's unintended series of discussions of Jacqueline taking on male counterparts. So there we go. So yes, this was the Jacqueline versus Chavo Guerrero match for the Cruiserweight Championship, which Chavo won in, you tell me how long this took.
6-7 minutes.
Yeah, no, it was only 4 minutes 50.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Didn't it feel like longer? Yeah,
it did. Here's the thing. There was quite a lot of issues with this. So Jacqueline had beat Chavo for the Cruiserweight Championship, and I think she did it where like there was a distraction and she low blowed him.
Low blow, yeah.
You know, and it's a good story. Like that you know, the woman wins the cruiserweight title. I think it was the first time it happened. Well, actually, in WCW they did it with Medusa, but still, in WWE, like first time it's happened, something different. So here, Chavo challenges her, and I guess the way they trying to make it more even is that Chavo will have one arm tied behind his back. Dude, trying to wrestle with one arm tied behind your back is so much more difficult than you think it is. Like, he would be so restricted. Sometimes we'll do an exercise in jiu-jitsu where we have to do it with one arm. Like, I'll have to put my arm through my belt so I can only use one arm during jiu-jitsu. And it's so difficult. And in wrestling, it would be even harder. You need your hands for everything and balance and everything else. So that really restricted what they could do in the match. This might not be a popular opinion, but I also just think that Jacqueline just wasn't really that over with the audience. I felt like if they did this with someone like Lita or Trish, crowd probably would have been really into it. And I remember they did Lita versus Dean Malenko, I want to say. Crowd loved it. Jacqueline, I just don't think was really a whole run in WWE. Always a good worker and obviously had a place in the company, but never really that over. Maybe the most she was over was when she was a heel feuding with Sable and joint with Mark Miro. But here, I just don't think the people really cared. I think that's fair to say.
I agree. Do you know what is a popular opinion?
What's that?
I think Jacqueline could defeat Disco Inferno with one arm tied behind her back in a real fight.
Probably.
Yeah, no, the match itself, though, was a series of Chavo Classic gets item A from outside to distract the ref while Chavo takes his arm out from behind his back and does a move. And then after Chavo Classic's item A gets taken away from him, Chavo Classic gets item B and does it again. And it just went on and on. It was just like very one note. I
thought that was weird. I felt like as soon as the referee was distracted, as soon as he pulled his arm out to free, he should just finished it there and then. But they just kept going.
Did it through. Yeah.
It's like, that's not really heat. Like, the heat would have been just like, you know, like a thief in the night. You got to be quick and boom. Like, you know, you can't do it too much. So yeah, I love Chavo, you know, shout out to Chavo, but this was a miss for me.
A recap package where John Cena white knights for Tori Wilson and America precedes Rene Dupree versus John Cena, which wasn't as good as expected given the both of them. Also, perpetual suck-up Cena also kisses the knot of LA where the event takes place. And of course, who wins? Cena wins in just under 10 minutes.
Few things about this I was thinking watching this. So one, John Cena comes out and he's still doing the Thugonomics still here. Doctor of Thugonomics here. He still has that music.
Much better music, isn't it? It's awesome.
Well, I was watching it thinking he does the rap and that was always pretty over. And here, this was, you know, not too much longer after he'd, you know, been a heel and the crowd had turned him face because, you know, they liked his raps and everything else.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, obviously, he's the US champion here. So we haven't quite got to him, you know, being a main eventer yet, but we're getting there. We're getting close. When I was watching this, I was thinking, why did Cena stop doing the Thugonomics gimmick? Could he have not been the babyface with the edge still, like doing the raps? Like, it seemed like when he became world champion and a true main eventer, he just dropped all that and kind of just became like, I don't know, Mr. America or whatever. I don't know why. Like, I wonder, that's never really been discussed. Like, why did John Cena stop doing the rap gimmick or the Thugonomics gimmick? Because he could have kept doing it. It just seemed like he had something and they just kind of stripped that away. And I assume there's a reason. Maybe they just felt like he needed to move on from that. But I would have, you know, for me, I would have kept him doing it.
His outfit largely stayed the same as well. So visually, he kind of stayed the same. But yeah, that's a good point. Like, why can't he have both? Why can't he be the support the troops America guy and the rapper? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Have some edge. No, you're right. Yeah.
Watching this as well, it's clear that WWE probably had real high hopes for Rene Dupree, and it's crazy to think that Renee is 20 years old here. Just
What?
20.
No way.
He was like
Damn,
the youngest
shredded.
guy like signed to WWE ever. He was like 19 or something, or he was 19 when he was tag team champion. His father was a wrestler, so Rene had been wrestling since he was super young and just got big and jacked. And it's a shame he didn't work out, Rene. I think there was issues, and obviously being so young. Like, dude, if I can't imagine being 20 years old and wrestling John Cena pay-per-views. Like, my God, you know what I mean? What a lot, I probably would have been fired in a week. So yeah, unbelievable. But yeah, Renee seemed to have all the tools. He had the look, he had the physique, he was a good worker, he had a good character. But unfortunately, just never seemed to work out for Renee. And I spent quite a bit of time with Renee, different shows in Europe and everything else. And I always thought he was a really great guy. And it's a shame that he didn't get like a bigger run in the WWE, because I'm sure they looked at him and thought, wow, this is potential future world heavyweight champion material. But obviously it didn't work out like that.
Do you remember the D's nuts meme?
I don't even know really what it is. I think I had someone try to explain it to me once and I still didn't really get it. But I've seen it and heard it a bunch of times, yes.
Okay. Well, it came into prominence in 2015. You can see that if you're on Patreon here by the Google Trends. There you go. November 2015, that's when it gained prominence. Why am I showing you this? Okay. Marty, when was this pay-per-view, Judgment Day?
I think you said May 16th, 2004.
Yeah. For the listeners, can you read what this crowd sign says in May 2004?
It says, choke on D's nuts, Rene Dupree, F you.
Yes. Decade before the meme gained prominence. Isn't that interesting? I thought so. And I know what you're thinking. What about the Dr. Dre, off the album, right? Here you go. Spelt differently. Track 6, D's nuts.
What does D's nuts mean? So you're saying they're above, way above the trend? Before the trend?
I'm saying this guy in the crowd used the phrase D's nuts in the same spelling as the meme from 2015 back in 2004.
Oh, I thought it was. I feel like it was something in the early 2000s, and then it got like a resurgence in 2015.
Well, no, it's from the Dr. Dre album from 92.
Okay, gotcha.
But this is the spelling of that.
That's
now, I think you're no.
It's just got one extra letter.
Why do you hate it when I find time travelers? Like the first selfie.
I think
what is it that you have against time travelers? Yeah, I am.
I've got a feeling that if you were a pro wrestler, or maybe I train you finally to become a pro wrestler, you'd want your gimmick to be time traveler.
Oh, that's an e-sword. That's amazing. That's so good. Has there ever been one?
No. And I wonder, it would either have to be in a wacky company, like Lucha Underground or something, but could you do it in a non-wacky company? Could it be maybe a guy that thinks he's a time traveler? Because obviously you can't just be it couldn't be on WWE this guy is a time traveler. That would not, work. But
yeah,
maybe someone that thinks they're a time traveler could be kind of funny. It'd have to be a comedy gimmick, though, I assume.
Yeah, we need to let's lab this.
Yeah, let's work on that.
Let's work on that. I think there's something there. It can't fail worse than Mordecai.
Well, actually, it'd be kind of cool when the time traveler comes in and he goes to the world champion. He's like, oh, you're gonna lose the belt of the pay-per-view. We have to do something. I've come back here, and it could be kind of fun, huh?
Yeah. Or they're always one step ahead of their opponent.
Well, yeah, that too. Yeah. How would they ever lose? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, incidentally, this is the part of the night where I noticed one of the main cameras to pick up the matches had a dead pixel in it. And then from that point, I couldn't unsee it. There's a white dot every time they cut to that camera. Next, we have a package for Kenzo Suzuki, who I actually have no idea who that was and have never seen them again, only in this package. Do you know who they are?
Kenzo Suzuki?
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually got him from New Japan, I want to say. Very large gentleman from Japan, and typically the wrestlers from Japan weren't like really big, so they saw Kenzo Suzuki, even though he was like really quite green, and there was like much better wrestlers in Japan because he was big. They were like, oh, excited. So they brought him in. Funny enough, he ended up being a tag team with Rene Dupree. He had a run there. You know, I mentioned earlier about how in the mid 2000s, WWE would just randomly bring in big guys that never really amounted to anything. Kenzo Suzuki, you could argue, is kind of one of them. But yeah, I think he was from New Japan originally.
Cool. It's funny how there's the Japanese flag and it's like faded out over the top of him speaking, and he's called Kenzo Suzuki, and the captions of Peacock says "man speaks in foreign language," while the Japanese flag of a guy called Kenzo Suzuki is speaking. It's like, what is this mysterious foreign language, Marty? Your guess is as good as mine.
That's
but
funny.
Next we have the Undertaker versus Booker T match. Speaking of disappointing matches, considering the power involved, the stars involved. Yeah, Undertaker versus Booker T. I wasn't a fan of this at all. Mr.
Really?
Undertaker, I'll tell you why, but Mr. Undertaker defeats Booker T in just under 12 minutes, 11 minutes 28, despite Booker T's pouch of power.
Powder, do you mean?
Well, okay. So he goes and visits a voodoo priestess called Mama Sangre or something, who tells him she knows the recipe for this thing, this hex or this curse or something, or this powerful item that can defeat the Undertaker. And she says one of the steps that he needs to take in order, to perform this ritual thing or whatever, is to get the soil from on top of a grave.
Okay.
So, and we see that happen in a backstage thing. So it's like, okay. And we're just like led to assume that that's like one step of these things that he has to do to make this ritual happen. Turns out, no, that pouch of power was literally just full of dirt from a grave, and he throws it in the Undertaker's eyes like pocket sand, like Dale Gribble, which blinds the Undertaker for 2 seconds. Booker T doesn't capitalize on it at all.
No, it did not at all. It's funny you said you didn't really enjoy this match. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I was not really a big fan of the Undertaker during this period. In the ring, this wasn't my thing. Yeah. And I told you earlier, like back then, I wasn't the biggest fan of Booker T. Watching this back, I actually really enjoyed it. This was, to me, was one of the better matches, if not the best match so far on the card. I thought I really got into it because the crowd got into it. Booker T is a hell of an athlete in the ring. You kind of forget that as well, like how agile he was and everything else. And when you watch Undertaker work, like I'm not the biggest Undertaker fan. I was as a kid, the original Undertaker, but like you see him working, like, oh yeah, it makes sort of Mordecai look even worse because with Undertaker you see that explosiveness and that power. Like even if it's like simple, like a sidewalk slam or a leg drop, he just makes it look so impressive and just impactful. But so I was thinking that watching the match as well. But no, overall, I thought it was an enjoyable match. And again, this match you would have thought, oh, this would be for the world title. You wouldn't think Bradshaw would be in a world championship match, but no. Overall, Undertaker, he's trying to grow his hair out, I guess, because American Badass had short hair. He wants to get long hair again, so his hair is at that awkward mid-level, and it just doesn't look good. And that's the problem with committing to growing your hair out. I've been there. You just got to go for like at least a full year, if not 18 months, of just awkward phase. And if you're a wrestler, in real life, just wear a hat. But when you wrestle, what can you do? Do you know what I mean? Exactly, it kind of doesn't look great with the mid-level hair.
You mentioned Booker T's agility. I actually put that in my notes. Surely Booker T's power to defeat the Undertaker would just be his own agility. But no, he resorts to this pouch, which they just kept cutting back to. Like constantly, he had it in the corner of the ring, and they kept like zooming in on it. And it reminded me of like, it's the most wasted prop that they kept cutting back to since that mirror with Victoria and Trish Stratus. Just like, but them kept cutting back to it, and Booker T kept rubbing himself on it. Just it hurt the flow of the match, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that.
JBL brags about his success, and he gives Eddie Guerrero's mom a heart attack. Now, I actually think this was really good of her to give her life legitimately for a wrestling angle. That is the Guerrero's commitment to the business, right?
Well, you're joking, but there's conflicting stories here. Bruce Pritchard suggests that she actually kind of had like, a, for real, had like a mild heart attack during this.
Oh my! Oh no, I didn't know. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
like I don't
I
know
was
the full
kidding.
story, but like I guess the idea was that he was going to do something with her. Maybe either they'd already planned for her to have a heart attack, but then she actually kind of had one. It was
Oh
very
man.
bizarre, and like Bruce Pritchard tells the story, and like how Eddie was like mad as hell at Bruce Pritchard, and he thought it was going to kill him because he was so protective of his mother, and
Yeah.
and he thought it was Bruce's idea, and I think maybe it wasn't a heart attack, but she, became like very short of breath, and maybe it was something like that, and it just wasn't
Oh,
a
okay.
good situation either way.
No,
So
no. Oh, yeah. Sorry, no, I had no idea, man. I was just trying to be funny for my play-by-play. Whoops. It's just like they're trying to portray JBL to be just like the worst guy on the planet and
Yes.
succeeding. All right. So JBL versus Eddie next, and Eddie loses via disqualification and then dies straight after from blood loss.
Dude, so Eddie retained. This is for the SmackDown World Title. Eddie
WWE Championship, I think it was called.
The what? Sorry,
wasn't that the WWE Championship, and Raw had the Heavyweight Championship?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that sounds right. So Eddie, retains the belt despite losing the match via disqualification.
DQ. Yeah,
this is obviously the match and the moment that people remember from this show. Just a few things before we get into that. I knew this at the time, but this was a good reminder. Just how quickly they transitioned Bradshaw from like floundering mid-card or floundering mid-card tag team to main eventer. Like he legit was a babyface in the APA, turned heel and attacked Eddie Guerrero, and it's like you're getting a championship match, and became JBL just like that, click of the fingers. It was pretty remarkable, and it makes me wonder, how did they? You would have thought, we want to try him out as a heel first and see how that goes, and have him in the mid card, and then if he started to get really good response and good heat, like, we should have him challenge for the world championship. He's got loads of heat, but they literally were just like, nope, we just from being APA Bradshaw, we trust him. He's going to be heel, and he's wrestling Eddie for the title at the next pay-per-view. Pretty remarkable. Clearly, this is still they're still kind of transitioning him from Bradshaw to JBL, because this whole match, the commentary team referred to JBL as Bradshaw. And I just remember at the time as a kid, I would have been like, what would I have been? Whatever I was.
15?
I was like, I guess it was. I was like, I hated the fact that Bradshaw was wrestling for the World Heavyweight Championship. I mean, you can imagine my response where he ended up, not on this show, but later on winning it. I was like, what? Bradshaw, the world champ? But damn, JBL, you watch back, he was pretty awesome. An awesome heel. The other thing of this is just Eddie Guerrero carries himself so well, but I feel like Eddie's like the same height as me, maybe even a bit shorter, and like JBL just towers over him. It's such a big, like, JBL looks like a giant next to him, which I never really noticed when I was younger watching this, but now I do. I'm like, whoa, what a big difference. Dude, so I always thought that this blood from Eddie was like hard way. I thought like the chair, like JBL
like
hit
buckled
Eddie, hit him in the wrong place or whatever, or the wrong part of the chair. But apparently not. Apparently Eddie just like botched a blade job, and he like hit an artery, right? And dude, like, this is probably like the worst blade job I've ever seen. And I just think it would have been the case of like I can imagine just being in the match, you bladed, right? And you start to get loads of color, and at first you're like, hell yeah, because like the big fear of blading is that you're going to get like nothing come out, right? Or you just get tiny,
right,
right. So he probably bladed, was like, oh hell yeah, I got really good color, and he probably goes from that to like, yeah, I've got such good color. Oh man, like, have I overdone it? Oh no, and just starts going to panic. And I assume he was panicking like crazy, because there is one point Bradshaw, JBL gets Eddie in a sleeper, and Eddie's whole entire face is completely red. There's not You can't
dude.
see any skin on it. And there is just blood all over the ring, all over JBL, on the referee. I actually got really uncomfortable. It started to look more like a slasher movie than a wrestling match. Like really,
Oh,
really
dude.
bad. And it's actually
It
uncomfortable to watch.
pulses with his heartbeat. Like you can see it squirt out to his heartbeat.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
disgusting. No, you could. No, you seriously could. Like, oh man, it was gross. I would be, if I was JBL, I would be like so worried about
Yes.
like not carrying on because like you have to, but like, so, oh, I should mention this was a 23-minute match. And I get, as you know, if there's no more than two people in a match and it goes over 20 minutes, I'm bored. I wasn't in this instance, but a lot of that was what you call an afterbirth, right? Like after the match, Eddie still carries on going. And I'm like, I'd be thinking, can we get him in the back? Like, can we wrap this up before he just faints?
Dude, so like after he's been that much, I was thinking, oh my Lord, guys, like take it home. And
yes, and they just didn't.
And they kept going, and like you're getting crazy sympathy for like Eddie, and even like he misses, he goes up for the frog splash. You're like, oh, please be the frog splash. He misses, and now when I see people miss a splash from the top rope, you're just like, oh yeah, spot of the match. But watching this, they actually got me trapped in. I was like, oh my God, like I thought like, oh man, like he's going to be so hurt from missing the frog splash. Like, I was getting really like the blood, as uncomfortable as it was, it 100% completely made this match and, you know, a star making performance for JBL. And you could even argue, you know, with Eddie as well. But like, especially these days where we don't really see blood too often, we don't see it in WWE. AEW do it quite a bit, but nothing like this. Like dude, apparently when Eddie got to the back, he went into shock and he like passed out apparently, because obviously he'd cut like an artery. So that's not surprising. What is surprising is just how long he went with so much blood coming out of his head.
Yeah. It was about 10, 12 minutes of the match. There was a point in the match where JBL like holds Eddie's head to the camera and makes him zoom in and is like laughing and mocking him for being so slice open, which was very good, like for character work. But I couldn't imagine being able to do that where in the back of my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, I hope he's okay. You know, like being able to play the character while simultaneously having my own feelings. Like they must have communicated. He must have asked if he was okay. And he's like, yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. Like, I'm not really that queasy with blood, but this made me borderline like queasy. I was like, Jesus, like just, you know, way too much, way too much. But it made the match. And I will say this, like it had me invested, and like, I don't think the match was hurt from the disqualification finish. I know in this day and age, like if a main event of a WWE pay-per-view was ended in disqualification, all the fans would be like, this is rubbish, and there'd be uproar. But you know, this was very old school, and it was like an old school bloodbath from the 70s or the 80s even. And that's how they would end those bloodbaths. And because like the end of this, I know obviously they have a rematch at the Great American Bash. And at the end of this, I was like, oh, I actually want to go watch the Great American Bash match now. Like it had me invested. So I can imagine being a fan at the time, people saw this and were like, oh, I want to see the rematch. Do you know what I mean? Like you would want to from watching this match. And I can't remember how that rematch was, but I would be very surprised if it surpassed this. And it's like, who knew JBL had this in him? Like when the Acolytes or the APA dude. Used to come out for matches, I used to kind of be like, ugh, just like, ugh, APA. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, because to me, to most people, it was like the Dudleys, the Hardys, Edge and Christian. They're the tag teams you want to see. APA, you like to see them do the backstage segment, but in the ring, not interested. And it's like, who knew that Bradshaw had this type of match and, you know, fierceness inside of him? They just got it out of him and just, completely star-making performance for JBL.
For sure. And when Mick Foley gets thrown off the Hell in a Cell and whatever match that was, and the cell goes up and the Undertaker is on it, you can see Undertaker's face like he shits himself. Like he's like, you know, and you would. But then you're like, oh, hang on a minute. You're supposed to be the dead man. You're worried about heights. JBL being able to maintain his character throughout everything that was going on was just a masterclass. It was so well done. And another bit of props to, well, not JBL, but the character. You know, when gimmicks change, they often just completely change and they don't even mention the old them. They changed JBL from Bradshaw from the APA in such an organic way. He actually references, it was like, I felt like I was holding myself back, just drinking beers with my buddy and playing cards in the back. It's like he's direct. Like it's one of the only kind of gimmick changes where they directly reference their old gimmick as a reason for moving into the new gimmick in such a good, like in a very organic and believable way. So yeah, JBL as a heel is super good.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the best heels in the past like couple of decades for sure. And like I said, at the time, I couldn't get with it just because he'd been presented as a mid-card guy for so long. But you know, this change, it definitely worked. Few other notes I have. Eddie Guerrero, without the mullet, I get why he got rid of the mullet because it's more of a heel thing, but I almost feel like he loses some of his charm without the mullet or some form of mullet. This short hair, I didn't really like it. And I also felt like Eddie was maybe at this point, maybe like a little too bulky, a little too big, I felt. Like,
and the short hair accentuates like his like the weight on his face, which is fine, but I do feel like the mullet like shaped his face very well.
Or at least the the fringe or whatever else. I feel like the mullet is money, but I guess I understand like in 2004 you probably wouldn't want a mullet, so I get that part. Another funny thing at the end when the agents come out to break up the fight, because after the match Eddie he still continues to attack Bradshaw. You see Arn Anderson, Dean Malenko, and Fit Finlay. And I always thought it was funny, like 3 wrestling legends, and they're just like nameless officials. Do you know what I mean? like they're just, it's not like, oh, a legend's just come out. It's not like big pop. It's just like, oh, their names.
These backstage texts.
Yeah. And they're like 3 wrestling legends. It's kind of funny how WWE did that for years. And, you know, I think they probably, maybe now they name them, but they just come out and they don't even, mention it or anything.
Yeah, I feel like the DQ was absolutely fine, like you were saying, because before the pay-per-view, they built up that Eddie's just like on an emotional rampage.
Yes.
So it was fine, and the happy accident of the blood like kind of helped that. He's just gone wild, like he's just done. So it was fine. Like it really didn't hurt it at all. I actually enjoyed the DQ finish, honestly.
I did. You know what I was thinking though? Do you not think it would have been a cooler finish if, like, I guess this is in like, retrospect, and maybe they could have called this on the fly, but wouldn't it have been a better finish that they had to, it was like a referee stoppage because of the loss of blood? Would have been kind of cool. And I don't know. I was thinking about that. I was like, would a championship change hands on that? Because obviously it doesn't change hands on like count out or disqualification, but if it's like referee stoppage, how does that work? I never really thought about that before.
That would be a TKO in boxing, right? Like a technical knockout. I wonder what is like knockout rules of wrestling? Yeah.
See,
they're trying to bring back now,
they always say, I guess they say that in wrestling, like, or knockout. Do they still even say that? Because no matches ever end in a knockout, ever, ever. But referee stoppage, I think that would have been, if I was there and I was on the headset, I would have been saying, dude, there's so much blood. Like, I'd actually want the match to stop because of the blood. Like, that's the real reason why you stop the match. You know what I mean? And just do that. Like, referees, like, because they would do that. If there was that much blood in a real fight, like a UFC fight, 100% stop the match. Do you know what I mean? 100%. They would have stopped it way before it got that much. So I think that would have been a really cool way to like get over the match, get over JBL as a killer, get over Eddie as having a big heart. And Eddie could have been like, I still want to fight. I still want to go. And they're like, no, it's too much blood loss. Like, so he doesn't lose any face from it. It's just got too much blood. I think that would have been a cool way of doing it. But the way they did it as well, it works. So I'm not going to, go on about it too much.
The comment we got where nobody liked Eddie before he died. Dude. Need to watch that match, dude. Dude, watch the crowd.
So funny. Like one of the reels that I put up on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube was just was me talking about how Eddie, he's probably one of the greatest, in-ring bell-to-bell wrestlers of all time. I think I say in the video, like, is there anyone better at like moving in the ring, selling, bumping, offense, flying around the ring than Eddie Guerrero? And of course, that just opens it up to everyone giving their opinions. No, it's Shawn Michaels. No, it's AJ Styles. Quite a lot of people, not a lot, but a handful actually said Rob Van Dam, which kind of took me by surprise as like greatest of all time in ring. And I think RVD is,
good. That's great.
Spectacular. And I think you could make an argument like most unique wrestler of all time. Yeah, you can see that. But like best of all time. But there was quite a lot like that. But yeah, there was one person that said, I feel like everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I do really feel like this gentleman was misinformed because he said no one cared about Eddie Guerrero until after he died. And I was thinking, that's, not the case at all. And he was saying, oh, Eddie Guerrero was mid-carder and he's mid, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, well, that's not really, and he said, oh, he was not a big star until The Rock and Stone Cold left. And I was like, these are all kind of, invalid points.
Whether he was a star or not isn't relevant to
the point
whether he was the greatest bell to bell. Like,
But people cared about Eddie when he was alive. Absolutely. Dude, watch when he wins the world title from Brock Lesnar. It's like one of the biggest pops ever. Come on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I encourage them to watch these older pay-per-views and just watch the crowd. Just watch them.
Yes.
And formulate your opinion. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm going to say it right now because we always, we watch the shows. We say which was our favorite match and least favorite match.
Yeah.
As we're talking about this, I think it's obvious, but my favorite match by far, this Eddie Guerrero and JBL match.
It was fantastic. Yep. Easy peasy. Easy. Even with Dawn Marie's wardrobe malfunction, that's not enough for me. It's got to be Eddie's blading malfunction. And yeah, that match was just phenomenal. Like it was emotional. It was physical. It was old school, like you said. Masterclass performance from JBL, and to a lesser extent, but still super important, Eddie. Just all the pieces worked.
Absolutely. And worst match of the show, unfortunately, gonna have to give it to the ladies. Tori and Dawn just wasn't interested. I mean, you could say Mordecai and Scotty, but at least that was short, and it was like there was still intriguement. Like, oh, what is this Mordecai? Like you're seeing a wrestler for the first time. That's can be exciting. So I'd say Tori and Dawn. I wasn't into the tag match with Gunn and Harkoholic either, but they're all good workers at least. So yeah, worst match, Tori Wilson versus Dawn Marie.
So I was thinking of saying Chavo versus Jacqueline.
Oh, actually, yeah.
Well, the reason why I'm not is because it did exactly what. Well, it was too long, actually, but like, come on, what were you expecting from it? It was kind of what it said it was going to be on the tin. So I think I'm going to give it, despite the wardrobe malfunction, which I enjoyed, the Dawn Marie and Tori one. Yeah, it wasn't the greatest. Went on too long as well for what it was.
Overall, as a show,
here's the thing.
I felt like there was quite a handful of stinkers. There was a handful of matches that I was like, why are these on pay-per-view? I think this time they hadn't really worked out yet how to do like the single brand only pay-per-views, because again, there seemed to be like a lot of filler on this show. The main event, I thought, well, it was said is amazing, and I actually forgot how good it was. And actually, I definitely consider this match a classic. And I don't know before this if I really did think of it as a classic. I just thought of it as the match where Eddie bled a bunch. But now looking back, I'm like, oh, that was a classic match. That was awesome. So if I had to give the show a rating overall, obviously the main event picks it up. But other than that, there isn't really that much on it. I still did enjoy watching it. But again, I think that's the nostalgia in me. I just enjoy watching old wrestling. So if I had to be fair, I'm going to give this show a 2-star rating, slightly worse than average.
That's absolutely fair. And this was the reason why we do Judgment Day on this episode. Let's go back and revisit it and see what we think. I really don't think it is as bad as people were making it out, or my friends were making it out. They were acting like it was a 1-star one. And like, yeah, I've got nostalgia. Watching it back, it's not like the 4-star that I thought it was, now that the final match was. But with all of that, I'm going to give it 2.5, which is average. I think I don't see anything wrong with this pay-per-view. It did have lulls and did have drags, but the final match really, really was a classic. If you watch it on Peacock, you're going to miss a lot of the lead up to it because they cut it out. There are multiple JBL sections that they cut out, which is unfortunate. So I'll factor that in. That's all missing, which does hurt the final, because you're not going to find it anywhere else unless you buy it on eBay, I guess, on DVD. Yeah, I think 2.5 is fair, or 2 for you is fair, 2.5 for me. It's not a 1-star pay-per-view like people were making out. It just isn't. And it's not the 4 or 5-star pay-per-view that my brain as a child thought it was. I think it really is somewhere in the middle. But that final match, I'm really glad that you went back and revisited this pay-per-view and found something that you can enjoy out of it more than when you last watched it, which was the classic final match. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, 2.5 I think is completely fair. Would I recommend it to like a casual wrestling viewer to like go back and search out? Honestly, probably not. I wouldn't say waste your time watching. I really wouldn't. Maybe find the final match on YouTube or something. I wouldn't recommend the pay-per-view.
No.
Waste your time. There's better ones.
It's better ones. It's a one-match show for sure.
Basically.
One-match show.
Yeah.
One-match show.
Cool.
Well, Sam, that was our review of Judgment Day 2004. If you enjoyed this podcast, then maybe you'd like to give us a review. So give us a 5-star review on the old Apple podcast. And if you do a nice one, we'll read it out on the show and you'll get a shout out. Also, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, you don't stop. And of course, YouTube at The Villain Pod. We're doing some amazing numbers on the social media right now. One of our Santino reels over the free platforms has got like, I want to say it's either like 2.5 close to 3 million views or something across, just for one video across the free platforms, which is pretty insane. So our YouTube channel is building up constantly. Instagram is, and our TikTok is. So I truly believe we put out the best sort of wrestling social media content out there. Sam and I are very real. We're very honest. We do this podcast. We're not comedians, so we're not trying to be funny, and we're also not pretending to be funny. So if I'm not doing fake laughing after everything Sam says, we're also not doing fake shock on this or whatever. I'm just giving my insight as a experienced professional wrestler. Sam is giving his insight as a long-term fan that's kind of had one foot in and is trying to put the foot back in now. And, that's what we offer. So, I don't know why I just went on a little tangent then, but I'd appreciate it if you followed us on the social media as well.
All right. And I would love to hear your memories of Judgment Day 2004. Did your brain hype this up for 20 years like mine did? Or did you always think it was a dud? Or do you still stick by it that it was pretty good? I'm curious. This is one that's stuck by me through a lot of years, and I just want to hear other people's memories and feelings about it. But yeah, until then, though, of course, have a good week. Till next week.